The National Desk, America's News Now.
We need to be very concerned about this, given that China is our #1 adversary.
A record surge of Chinese nationals crossing the U.S. southern border. 2 reasons that may be behind the dramatic rise. And the investigation into the UNLV shooter deepens. What he sent university staff before the deadly attack. And later, car thefts driving up insurance costs. The Fact Check team investigates which states are seeing the biggest impacts. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. We are glad you are with us. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and on this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week and look ahead at what to expect, starting with the 4 big stories we've been following this week. The death of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, the new Russian sanctions from the Biden administration, plus Congress facing another looming budget deadline, how the U.S. military and the war in Ukraine could be impacted. And another round of student debt cancellations, which borrowers are eligible. But first, we begin with the latest in the race to the White House. A new Quinnipiac poll shows President Biden beating former President Donald Trump in a 2024 rematch. Biden led Trump by 4 points, which is a narrower lead than the same poll reported in January. When the ballot included independent candidates, the race was even tighter. Biden received 38% of the vote, while Trump received 37%. In Michigan, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib is calling on progressive voters to protest President Biden's response to the Israel-Hamas war by not voting for him in their primary Tuesday. Other Democrats warn it could cost them the White House in November. The National Desk Atra El-Nashar reports.
Hey, Biden, what do you say?
Arab voters in Michigan sending a message loud and clear to the Biden-Harris campaign.
You are absolutely not welcome in Michigan.
The president's support for Israel, they say, is costing him their support as the death toll in Gaza exceeds 29,000, according to the local health ministry under the Hamas-controlled government. Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, the first Palestinian-American woman to serve in Congress, represents Dearborn, where more than half of the roughly 110,000 residents are Arab, according to census data. She's encouraging voters to check uncommitted on their ballot instead of President Biden in their state's February 27th presidential primary.
This is the way you can raise our voices. Don't make us even more invisible.
They're voters the president needs to win the swing state in November. In 2020, he won Michigan by just 154,000 votes. The state is home to more than 206,000 Muslim registered voters. Some Democrats warn protesters they'll end up helping former President Trump in November. Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, a prominent Michigan progressive who ran for governor in 2018, is voting uncommitted and writes, while it's clear that Biden will win the primary, it's critical for him and his team to understand that votes in November have to be earned. And, make no mistake, I will do everything in my power to stop Trump, and this is part of that. President Biden is aware of the pushback. Earlier this month, he sent some of his top aides to Michigan to meet with Arab and Muslim community leaders. And Michigan Congresswoman Debbie Dingell says she's had some tough conversations with the president.
I've got a lot of constituents, a lot of people that are neighbors and friends who are hurting, have lost family, are scared for their family. This is an issue that he's got to talk about with people head on. But Donald Trump doesn't offer any solutions either.
The primary protest sending a strong warning to a president who's not likely to drop long-standing U.S. support for Israel. And if he doesn't change course, it's an open question how or if this key constituency will vote in November. In Washington, I'm Atra El-Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Developing now, a judge rejected a request from former President Trump's defense team to delay the enforcement of penalties in his New York civil fraud trial. Judge Arthur Engeron said Trump's lawyers failed to explain why a 30-day delay was warranted. Last week, Trump was ordered to pay $355 million plus interest and was barred from leading a New York company for 3 years. President Biden met with the loved ones of Alexei Navalny in California Thursday. The outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin died in a Russian prison last week. Biden says he spoke with Navalny's widow and their daughter to convey his condolences for their loss.
To state the obvious, he was a man of incredible courage, and it's amazing how his wife and daughter are emulating that.
Friday, the Biden administration announced 500 sanctions against Russia in response to Navalny's death and the war in Ukraine. The U.S. Army says it's under increasing pressure as it is left to foot the bill for Ukraine support. Army officials are concerned that without new funding, money will need to be pulled from other critical projects. Since October of 2023, the Army has spent over $430 million on various operations. They include training Ukrainian troops, transporting equipment, and U.S. troop deployments to Europe. That bill was paid from the Army's Europe and Africa Command, which has a $3 billion budget. Without a 2024 budget approved by Congress, the budget is set to run out of cash for operations in Ukraine and elsewhere in Europe and Africa by the end of May. New details now. A Texas special grand jury is convening to examine the botched police response to the Uvalde school mass shooting. Numerous law enforcement officers who responded to the tragedy have been ordered to appear before the panel. That's according to the Austin American-Statesman, which adds in-person testimony is scheduled to start next week. The May 2022 shooting at Robb Elementary School claimed the lives of 19 students and 2 teachers. More new details on the investigation into the gunman in the deadly UNLV mass shooting in December. According to a new police report, gunman Anthony Polito sent out 22 letters to university staff prior to the attack. The letters contained derogatory statements towards staff at institutions Polito had worked with. Investigators say they believe he blamed those individuals for not being able to advance his career.
In the screening of those envelopes that we were able to intercept after going through 14,000 pieces of mail and identifying the 22 that were sent. The first letter that we opened had an unknown white powder substance in it.
That substance was later found to be harmless. The White House is considering a new executive action to quell the surge of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. This after saying in the past they could not use the executive action. Now, the policy would make it harder for migrants to seek asylum if they enter the country illegally. It would involve an authority known as 212F. Former President Trump tried to do something similar in 2018, but a federal court ruled the authority does not override existing asylum law. Right now, it's unclear how the Biden administration's action could overcome this. Citizens from one of the United States' top adversaries now make up the fastest growing demographic of migrants attempting to enter the United States illegally. Here's national correspondent Kayla Gaskins.
As the situation at the southern border deteriorates, it's not only the overwhelming amounts of illegal migrants causing concern, but where they're from.
Ma'am, where are you from?
China.
China?
China.
China?
Yeah.
China?
Yeah. China.
Chinese nationals becoming the fastest growing group entering the U.S. illegally.
We need to be very concerned about this, given that China is our #1 adversary.
In fiscal year 2021, Border Patrol apprehended 450 Chinese nationals. By 2022, that figure grew to more than 2,000. And in 2023, it surpassed 24,300. In the first few months of 2024, Border Patrol has already apprehended nearly 19,000 Chinese nationals at the southern border. One possible reason for this dramatic rise is the U.S. restricting visas as tensions heat up between the two nations. In 2016, 2.2 million temporary visas were issued to Chinese migrants. In 2022, that dropped to just 160,000. The Chinese are also much more likely to be granted asylum in the U.S. compared with other applicants.
Given the rapid increase of Chinese nationals crossing the border and how adversarial Beijing acts towards the U.S., we have to assume that much of this is state-sponsored.
And as Republicans sound the alarm on this new phenomenon,
clearly it shows that the border is completely open. Joe Biden wants it open.
Many Democrats chalk it up to political theater.
They're weaponizing immigration. They want to see if they can get votes for it.
In San Francisco, a non-citizen Chinese immigrant was just sworn in to serve on the city's election commission.
That is shocking. Citizenship should matter.
But Americans increasingly see the border as a major issue, and polling shows it's a weak spot for Joe Biden's re-election. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins for the National Desk, America's News Now.
More Americans are getting relief from the Biden administration. This week, the White House announced the president approved $1.2 billion of debt cancellation for about 153,000 borrowers enrolled in the SAVE plan. That's for people who originally borrowed $12,000 or less and have been making payments for at least 10 years. A new report from Bankrate found U.S. drivers are paying 26% more on average for their car insurance. Several factors like location and weather, they're the major drivers of this increase. Auto theft is another. I'm back with Connor from the Fact Check team. And Connor, how much have auto thefts increased?
Dee, they've gone up quite a bit. And according to data on 40 U.S. cities from the Council on Criminal Justice, car thefts increased 23% last year. And then carjackings, which involve direct contact with the driver, those actually did decrease by 5%. But let's go back a little further to get an even better picture. So between 2019 and last year, car thefts went up 105% and carjackings went up 93%.
Wow, that clearly is a lot. Which cities are struggling the most with this? I'd imagine the bigger cities.
Yeah,
right?
That's exactly right. Let's take a look at some data from last year. So cities with the highest carjacking rates per 100,000 people include DC, Baltimore, Memphis, Chicago, and Denver. And then cities with the highest car theft rates were Dallas, Memphis, St. Louis, Baltimore, and Rochester.
And is it true that specific makes and models are being targeted?
Yep, it sure is. According to Highway Loss Data Institute, theft insurance claims for Hyundais and Kias were 10 times higher in 2023 compared to 2020, mainly because those specific cars lack some basic theft prevention devices.
All right, many people have cars, so this is good information to know. Yeah. Thank you for that, Connor. For more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. Coming up next here on the National Desk, America's News Now. Small businesses struggling, the major problems causing some owners to close shop. Plus, considering a career change, how burnout among doctors is impacting patient care and how AI could help. Small businesses generate 44% of U.S. economic activity, but issues like crime and inflation are causing some to close up shop for good. Joining Jan Jeffco to discuss is president of the Job Creators Network Foundation, Elaine Parker.
Job Creators Network represents millions of hardworking Americans, as we know, and I was looking at one of your organization's surveys that showed the impact crime has really had on small businesses everywhere. 31% of small businesses say neighborhood crime specifically has increased costs because of stolen inventory, because of extra security. So tell us more about this and also the parts of the country that are getting hit the hardest.
Yeah, Jan, in addition to all of the headwinds that have been facing small businesses for the last 3 years with high inflation and high labor costs and credit crunch and high energy costs, crime is rearing its head and showing to be a huge cost for them as well. In what we're seeing in our poll for January is that major Democratic-run cities in the Northwest or in the western side of the country, California, Oregon, Washington State, tend to see these crimes more and more. There is a disproportionate effect on our small businesses when it comes to crime. And you mentioned large companies, it's impacting large companies. It is. But when you think about a large company that decides to close its stores, say Target last fall announced they were closing 9 stores in 4 states. Those stores tend to be anchor stores to shopping centers. When they leave, the economic impact is even greater for those small businesses because those stores bring in the foot traffic. And so these soft on crime DAs in these cities are really hurting their economies, and they don't seem to understand the spillover impact.
Yeah, and in addition to crime, business owners are also worried about inflation and government policies when it comes to whether their company will survive. So what's the forecast at this point? What industries are looking good in 2024? And what concerns do you have specifically?
Well, our poll shows that about 60% of small business owners are concerned that economic conditions could force their businesses to close. And the reason behind that is because of the historic inflation that they've been under for the last 3 years. And while we have seen the rate of inflation come down, the rate of increase in inflation come down, prices are still elevated by about 20%, and that has a huge impact on our small businesses' ability to make a profit, which you need to stay in business. And they're having trouble passing those costs on to consumers because consumers are so price sensitive now. And the only way to stop this inflation is to get this reckless government spending under control. Unfortunately, the Biden administration doesn't seem interested in doing that.
There's been a disproportionate impact, as we know, on small businesses when it comes to these government regulations. So are we seeing any hope on the horizon that some lawmakers can fix this? And what advice do you have for small businesses struggling right now?
Well, we've certainly seen some efforts brought forward both in the Senate by Senator Joni Ernst. She brought forward the Prove It Act, which is to help with regulations on small businesses, and that's to basically make lawmakers and the regulatory agencies do their jobs when it comes to implementing new regulations. There was a House version of the Prove It Act introduced in the last few weeks by Congressman Finstad, so we're excited about that. It's one of the provisions of our American Small Business Prosperity Plan, which is a blueprint for congressional leaders to bring back small businesses. We hope that those two bills make it to the floor for a vote because it really will help small businesses. Regulations are a hidden tax on small businesses, and they do disproportionately hurt them.
President of the Job Creators Network Foundation, Elaine Parker, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Right now, concerns are rising after at least 6 cases of measles have been confirmed at Manatee Bay Elementary School in Western Florida. The first case was reported last Thursday. The school is working closely with the health department to determine how the outbreak started. Those who have received the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine are 98% protected and are highly unlikely to contract the disease. If symptoms develop, the school is urging parents to call their healthcare provider for instructions. Many doctors are burned out. Some have even considered a career change. This could have serious implications for patients in need of care. The National Desk, Janae Bowens, has a look at the issues and how AI could help.
Dr. Anand Parekh practiced internal medicine for many years. He gets why so many doctors are exhausted.
Staffing shortages, their reimbursement challenges, just the sheer administrative complexity related to electronic health records and billing.
A new survey from Athena Health shows 93% of doctors feel burned out on a regular basis. And 56% said they have considered leaving the field or no longer seeing patients.
It really affects the availability of when you can see your doctor, how long you can spend with your doctor, whether you can see the doctor that you want.
On a brighter note, 8 in 10 physicians believe AI could eventually reduce many of their problems. AI expert Dr. Lisa Palmer agrees.
I would like for people to think about artificial intelligence being their doctor's co-pilot, their doctor's assistant. It's not going to replace them. It's going to make their doctors' lives easier so that they can spend more time with you doing what they want to do.
There's still regulatory concerns like a patient's privacy. But Dr. Parekh says AI will provide a lot of benefits.
To scribe notes so that a doctor can spend more time with a patient, looking at a patient as opposed to looking at a computer screen. AI could potentially help support a clinician as they think through what is a diagnosis a patient has, how do you manage their illness.
That survey found many physicians are working an average of 15 extra hours every week, and the ones already using electronic health records spend less time working extra. Now that's more proof that technology and AI might help doctors to feel less burned out. In Washington, Janae Bowens for the National Desk.
Coming up next here on the National Desk, a wage hike for workers backfires for businesses, how the change is impacting their bottom line. Plus, glass shower doors spontaneously exploding. What's causing the unusual phenomenon that's impacted thousands of Americans? The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Maine, where a state program is pairing homeowners with young adults looking for an affordable place to live.
Homeowner Linda Edgerton is now retired and on a fixed income. If only her property taxes, electricity, heat, and water bills were fixed as well.
The water bill has gone up, my taxes, all the bills, groceries, everything's gone up. But it's whether or not I'm going to be able to afford to stay.
Maine Housing's new pilot program, a nearly $200,000 contract with Nesterly, may be the answer she and other older Mainers are looking for.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's probably a fit that's going to have to be very unique to the situations, because you're bringing people together who aren't related.
Maine Housing says supports are in place to ensure safety, background checks on renters and homeowners. Nesterly will also coordinate the first meeting, draft the lease agreement, collect rent payments, and can dispatch staff to help resolve any conflicts.
In Washington, D.C., the Consumer Product Safety Commission is investigating following thousands of reports of glass shower doors spontaneously exploding. Look here at the images. The dangerous problem has resulted in victims suffering lacerations at home and in hotels.
My initial reaction, I thought my life was shot. Well, I'm home from the ER after multiple lacerations and stitches. A large piece of glass come down on top of my hand, cut my thumb real bad. Actually, I had a tendon sticking out of my thumb.
An expert who replaces shower doors says the explosions are likely due to a small manufacturing defect that's so tiny you can't see it. In Washington, some business owners say Seattle's new minimum wage for app-based workers is devastating their bottom line. Some apps are adding a $5 fee to food deliveries, causing some customers to stop ordering altogether.
Third-party delivery vendors are about 30% of our business right now. And we've seen a 30% decline in that business. I think customers are just not willing to pay the extra $5 on each order.
Some drivers also say they're not receiving the extra cash that apps are charging customers. Still ahead, disgusted and violated the security camera breach that allowed thousands of people to see into strangers' homes. Plus, catching catfishes, the added layer of identity verification Tinder is now using to stop romance scams. The IRS is zeroing in on corporate jet usage as it cracks down on wealthy tax cheats. On Wednesday, the agency said it will start dozens of audits this spring. There are currently 10,000 corporate jets operating in the U.S. Tax benefits for business air travel can add up to tens of millions of dollars in deductions. The IRS is concerned some business people are taking the deductions for flights that are in reality personal trips. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now, Delta is resuming flights to Israel next month, reviving a route from Newark to Tel Aviv. The service has been suspended since October at the start of the Israel-Hamas war. And around 13,000 users of Wise security cameras briefly had access to footage from others' homes due to a security event last Friday. The company has since added a new layer of verification between users and videos. Dating app Tinder is adding an extra step for users to confirm the authenticity of their profiles. Users will have to submit a video of themselves along with a driver's license or passport. Those stories and much more are available right now at thenationaldesk.com. New details: Apple is making its mark in yet another realm, sports. The company's new free app will deliver real-time scores and stats and even live betting odds from the NBA, NHL, and MLS. The app is being released ahead of March Madness and will offer real-time data for both men's and women's NCAA basketball. Ahead in our next half hour, scientists have discovered the possible cause of long COVID, the new findings that could be used to treat the illness. Plus, President Biden's brother testifying on Capitol Hill, what he said about the president's involvement in family business dealings. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
The cyber threat posed by the Chinese government is massive.
The FBI is sounding the alarm about potential cyber attacks by China, how it could impact everything from drinking water to cell phones. Plus, unsafe in her own neighborhood, a missing 11-year-old found dead in Texas, who authorities believe is behind her murder. Plus, Houthi strikes in the Red Sea continue to hurt global trade, why the U.S. has struggled to stop the unconventional attacks. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Gatton, and this weekend, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security are investigating after a network service disruption hit AT&T customers coast to coast. Some users woke up to SOS messages. Others had no connection at all and no ability to make calls. The highest numbers of AT&T outages were reported across the Midwest, Southeast, and in Texas, according to Down Detector. The FCC announced it is also investigating the cause and is working with AT&T. The wireless carrier believes the outage was caused by a software update, not a cyber attack. Meantime, the U.S. and its allies are sharing their concerns about the threat of a cyber attack by China. They met recently in Munich for a security conference where experts warn they are woefully unprepared. The National Desk, Audra Elnishar, explains what they fear could happen.
FBI Director Christopher Wray warning U.S. allies and partners the Chinese Communist Party is putting its entire government behind an effort to undermine global security, rapidly developing cyber tools combined with espionage and election interference to do it.
The cyber threat posed by the Chinese government is massive. China's hacking program is larger than that of every other major nation combined.
China building cyber weapons within critical infrastructure, poised to attack when Beijing decides the time is right.
To cut us off from our water, or electricity whenever they want, to take control of our phones or our personal data.
Members of Congress acknowledge the federal, state, and local governments and private companies that run these utilities are not prepared. In a recent op-ed for The Hill, Charles Clancy, Chief Technology Officer at research and development company MITRE, writes, "A 100-foot tsunami is coming, and we're rearranging sandbags on the ground. Should the time come, it would be massively disruptive for everyday Americans." Cornell professor Rick Geddes.
Your cell phone. So that's all now wireless. And so that's connected to towers, connected to satellites. If there were some sort of a cyber attack on that type of infrastructure, there's no backup.
Control systems for water and sewage plants connected to the internet are also vulnerable.
They're stretched, and they just don't have the internal bandwidth to address these cybersecurity threats on their own. So they really need help.
Geddes and other experts say localized training and support are the best defense, so operators can detect and respond to a cyber attack in real time.
And time is of the essence. FBI Director Wray says China is using artificial intelligence to rapidly improve its hacking operation. Chinese authorities consistently deny these accusations. In Washington, I'm Atrel Najar.
Developing now, the European Union is investigating if TikTok breached new online rules aimed at protecting children. The proceedings will focus on the platform's algorithms, which officials say could be addictive for kids. In a statement, TikTok says it has pioneered features and settings to protect teens and keep under 13s off the platform. The company could face fines up to 6% of its global revenue. A health alert, scientists may have discovered the possible cause of long COVID. Research published in the journal Science Advances linked the debilitating condition to high levels of an antiviral protein. Now, the study revealed patients had persistently elevated readings of interferon gamma, which is associated with fatigue, aching muscles, and depression. The findings mean the protein could be used to detect long COVID and possibly be used as a therapy to treat the condition. Former YouTube host Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt will each spend several years behind bars. A judge sentenced the pair of 8 passengers fame after they took a plea deal in a graphic child abuse case. The two pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse in December. They could face 1 to 15 years behind bars for each conviction, although they won't serve more than 30 years due to a Utah law regarding consecutive sentences. The length of their sentencing will be determined by Utah's Board of Pardons and Parole, but it will be a few months before the sentence is announced. A family friend accused of murdering an 11-year-old girl and throwing her body into a river has now been formally charged. Don McDougal is facing a capital murder charge for the death of Audrey Cunningham. Investigators say he was the last known person to see her before she disappeared last week in Livingston, Texas. Police say her body was tied to a rock with a cord that was consistent with a rope found in McDougal's truck. Right now, computer chip company GlobalFoundries is preparing to expand its production in New York and Vermont. It comes after the Biden administration unveiled a new investment to expand domestic computer chip production. The $1.5 billion project is expected to create almost 10,000 jobs over the next decade. It marks the 3rd award to a semiconductor company under the 2022 CHIPS and Science Act. Joining Jan Jeffco to discuss is Director of General Economics and Trade at the Cato Institute, Scott Lincecum.
How significant is this expansion? And we know there are many hurdles that still remain to revitalize domestic semiconductor manufacturing. So talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, well, it's significant for the company. Anytime you get a $1.5 billion in free taxpayer money, you're gonna like it. But there's still a lot of asterisks. First, the money hasn't really even been approved. It's just an initial stage. And, for a $500+ billion global semiconductor market that's expected to grow into the trillions in the coming years, the money is really just a drop in the bucket, especially since other governments are providing their own subsidies too. But the biggest hurdles for the U.S. semiconductor industry really aren't about subsidies or even semiconductor demand. It's problems on the supply side. Labor shortages, immigration restrictions, bad tax policy, and especially permitting and environmental regulations. Until you fix those problems, all these subsidies might be for naught. might be like hooking a garden hose up to a fire hydrant, right? So even if the federal government picks the right technologies, that money might just be kind of slamming into a supply side brick wall.
Yeah, it can take a long time for some of those regulations and those permits to even pass, right? Lithium prices right now close to what might be rock bottom. Metal used to make electric vehicle batteries fell fast in 2023 after, we saw this huge rise just a couple years ago back in 2021. So what does this mean? How should investors be viewing these numbers?
Well, on the one hand, it's a clear signal that electric vehicle demand is weaker than expected. These minerals and lithium and others are critical to EV batteries and other things. If you need fewer EV batteries, you're going to have less demand and lower prices. But it's also a classic example of economist Julian Simon's famous lesson that, we humans really have an incredible ability to find and develop new resources if markets are relatively free. Here, everyone was freaking out in 2021 about lithium shortages and skyrocketing prices. But those prices, along with some other geopolitical things, drove global investors to find and develop new resources because they were out for those profits. So that future supply combined with that EV demand issue means a price collapse. And now that's probably going to be rough for commodities investors, but it's great for the rest of us, meaning we have an abundant supply of the resource we might need a lot of in the future.
Yeah. I want to talk about what's happening with Chinese banks right now because they did slash a key lending rate. In fact, one of the biggest cuts. The 5-year loan prime rate right now down to a low of 3.95%, which is pretty significant compared to what it was before, 4.2%. Talk about this. What does this mean for the global economy?
Well, it's more evidence, especially given what's going on in the Chinese stock market as well, that the Chinese economy is really weak and the Chinese government is trying furiously to engineer a rebound, but markets and private investors still don't seem to be buying it. Foreign investment still leaving China and going to India, Mexico, and elsewhere. And so while, China's economic weakness might be good for geopolitical issues, for the U.S.-China trade war and the rest, it probably means a weaker global economy, too, because of how big China's economy is and how big their consumer market is. If 1.4 billion people aren't buying as much, that's going to mean lower sales and profits for multinational corporations, including a lot of them that are headquartered here and employ a lot of Americans. So, we can cheer the geopolitical side of this, but it could have some economic repercussions as well.
Vice President of General Economics and Trade at the Cato Institute, Scott Lincecum. Good to see you as always. Have a great weekend.
You too.
In January, the U.S. redesignated the Houthis as a terrorist organization after they started attacks in the Red Sea. I'm back with Connor from the Fact Check team. Let's start. Give us some background.
Sure, Dee Dee. So the Houthis are a Shia Muslim militia that are based in Yemen, which is one of the poorest countries in the Middle East. But despite that, they've been able to target at least 45 ships in recent months, mainly because Iran has been supplying them with weapons for about a decade. Now, I read through this report right here from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it says that between 2015 and 2023, the U.S. intercepted at least 18 ships that were smuggling Iranian missiles and weapons to the Houthis.
The Houthis' strategies, Connor, in general, they're unconventional, sometimes even firing missiles from pickup trucks.
Right.
As you can imagine, does this make it difficult to stop these attacks?
Yeah, it can at times, Dee Dee. For example, since they don't have big weapons depots in one fixed location like a bigger military would, it can be harder for American fighter jets to take them out because they're usually operating like moving targets. However, based on U.S. military statements that have been tracked by the AP, American and allied forces have destroyed at least 73 missiles before they were launched, as well as 17 drones.
Interesting. Connor, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. So to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from the investigation into the Biden family business dealings to the GOP's possible presidential ticket.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day to report on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. The Bureau's correspondents are here to share their insights on the stories they've been covering. Conservative activists gathered at the CPAC conference outside of Washington, D.C. this past week under the assumption that former President Trump will clinch the Republican nomination in the coming weeks. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, they're already looking ahead to who he may pick as his running mate, aren't they?
They are, Steve, the organizers of this conference, even considering it a coronation of sorts for Donald Trump to be the nominee. And you can tell that by just taking a look at the speakers list. It's filled with dedicated Trump loyalists, Trump himself appearing at the conference this year. It's described really as a run for VP. Organizer Matt Schlapp embracing this idea, even referencing it as their version of The Apprentice. So who did we hear speak? We heard from Kristi Noem. She's the governor of South Carolina. We heard from Representative Byron Donalds from Florida, both of them very strongly supporting Donald Trump. And this is really a sign that the Republican Party, Donald Trump is the heart and soul of the core of the Republican Party right now. And that is what the organizers were trying to get across. Now, who is not here? Nikki Haley. That primary is still going on. She's still very much in this race, but Steve, she is on CPAC's list of potential nominees for VP. They're actually conducting a poll of their top choices. They put about 17 people on the list, and they include people like Nikki Haley, like Tim Scott, like Ron DeSantis, Elise Stefanik, Byron Donalds, who we mentioned, and Kristi Noem also on that list. And they want the attendees to weigh in on who they think is the ideal vice president for Donald Trump. But again, this race is still going on, so not over just yet.
Yep, and Nikki Haley, of course, not speaking, not going to make her case to the folks at CPAC before that straw poll, and not going to be probably in the race much longer. At least that's what Republicans are thinking, and Trump is hinting at. We'll see what happens in terms of who he decides to pick in the long run in the next few months. Meanwhile, the investigation continues into the Biden family business and their business dealings and whether President Biden had any involvement. National correspondent Christine Frizzell, what's the latest?
Yeah, this is all part of the impeachment inquiry into President Biden. And, every week we've seen some pretty high-profile witnesses come and speak to members of the House Oversight Committee. Last week, a business partner named Tony Bobulinski came and spoke to the committee. And this past week, we actually saw, for the first time in a long time, the president's younger brother, James Biden. Now, James Biden told the committee what he's told them before, which is that Joe Biden has never had any involvement or any direct or indirect financial interest in these business activities, none whatsoever. I'm reading sort of from a quote from his opening statement, which was released. Again, these meetings are all behind closed doors. The big meeting we're going to be watching for is going to take place next week. That is with Hunter Biden. But what's interesting here is that James Biden's statements sort of are run in contrast to what we've heard from some of these other witnesses, including Tony Bobulinski, who said Joe Biden was more than a participant in and a beneficiary of his family's business. He was also an enabler. So we've got all this going on. These witnesses, committee members have been relying on bank statements, emails, text messages, documents to back up their claims. Their chief claim, of course, that Joe Biden benefited from these businesses, was paid as a result of, with questions about what kind of was given in return. There is no evidence so far of that. One other thing to note, though, something really big happened in the last week, and that was a key witness, an FBI informant who was apparently a trusted witness, Alexander Smirnoff, was indicted for making false statements to the FBI. Everything he said apparently was not corroborated. The FBI says is wrong, and he was actually indicted for this. So this is giving Democrats the opportunity to say, you know what, all of this is a hoax. Let's shut this thing down. Republicans say it's not going to happen.
And there'll be a lot to watch next week. You mentioned Hunter Biden will be on Capitol Hill behind closed doors, but doesn't mean it won't be a circus as he enters and leaves the building. We'll be watching that one very closely. And as the national debt continues to skyrocket, it turns out the U.S. isn't the only nation facing a flood of red ink. National correspondent Audra Elnishar, what are economists saying about the record amount of global debt?
Yeah, well, we just learned that 2023 ended with global debt reaching, get this,
$313 trillion. That's according to the Institute of International Finance. They do a global debt tracker every quarter, and another record was shattered. $15 trillion just at the end of 2023, and that was really driven by debt coming from France, Germany, and the United States. Now, speaking of U.S. debt, this week it hit $34.3 trillion. But in this broader picture of $13.3 trillion globally, it's all the more painful with these high interest rates. The Federal Reserve is not the only central bank raising rates in the face of high inflation, and the burden is heaviest on developing economies. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa are paying more than 7% of GDP just on interest payments. That's more than they pay on education and healthcare combined, according to the World Bank. So it's a huge issue. Of course, it's certainly something that causes a lot of pain and political debate here in Washington, but it's something the world's going to be grappling with for at least the next few decades.
Audra, Christine, Kayla, great work, great reporting as always. Thanks for your hard work. Back to you.
Up next here, discovering hidden tunnels along the southern border, who is using them and what they're bringing with them. Plus, car chase chaos, the long rap sheet uncovered after a suspect's dangerous getaway attempt. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From a chaotic police chase in Virginia to a Washington state strip mall targeted by thieves a dozen times within a year. We're taking the pulse of America, but we start with a Florida sheriff visiting the southern border to crack down on drugs entering the country.
Martin County Sheriff William Snyder spent most of last week on the Arizona-Mexico border at the invitation of local Sheriff Mark Daniels.
Now that I've gone out there and looked at it, I can tell you with absolute certainty, we have a porous border. And we have thousands of people coming across in unguarded areas across the border that don't have asylum claims, that may have criminal past, that may have been deported numerous times before, and they just keep coming at us.
Snyder says that while people are walking across the border, drugs are coming in literally under their feet through tunnels running from Mexico into the U.S.
They have a saying out there, drugs don't talk, which means this. They don't use the tunnels for human smuggling because if the cargo, the humans that were smuggled, get caught, they likely or could give up the tunnel, whereas the drugs never give up the tunnel.
24, 25 years. We never got hit like this since last year.
How much more of this can we absolutely take? It's the question swirling for those who work at this treble-targeted strip mall.
They would go through any lengths just to get whatever they want. They'll steal someone's car, smash it through, and get out.
The latest case happened early Saturday morning. As you see in this security footage, the target this time was a smoke shop.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Customers told us they were shocked to see damage at this store and at the strip mall yet again.
It's totally ridiculous. It's like we're trying to clean up the area, and it's like to have people do this and vandalize the area, it's just disrespectful.
The video shows the whole story.
A series of wild events started with a wild crash in the Fair Oaks area at the interchange of Route 50 and I-66 Monday. The driver of a stolen vehicle flies into the air in what Fairfax County Police say was an effort to flee from officers who had spotted him. Police say these guns and drugs were later found in that stolen car, and it's still under investigation who should face charges for them.
There were 5 occupants inside that stolen vehicle.
All 5 were taken to the hospital. Later on, police say one of the passengers, not the driver, fled the hospital with an IV still in his arm and stole an ambulance. That man has been identified as Ricky Lowe.
I know sometimes you guys put a guard on somebody and
7 News asked police about why he wasn't being closely watched at the hospital. Although court records show he has a long history of charges against him and he will now face a new charge for the stolen ambulance, police say at the time Lowe fled a Nova Fairfax hospital Monday, he was not facing any new charges.
Still ahead, the stories making headlines next week, from the next presidential primary contest to a looming funding deadline for Congress. Looking ahead to stories making headlines next week, Sweden's bid to join NATO could be ratified as soon as Monday. Hungary is the last country to approve its membership and could do so as soon as its parliament reconvenes. Republican and Democrat primary voters in Michigan will head to the polls on Tuesday. President Biden is expected to face opposition from the state's large Arab American population for his support of Israel. Friday is the first of 2 budget deadlines for Congress. 20% of annual appropriations are due that day, or portions of the government, including the IRS, could shut down. A total solar eclipse is expected on April 8th, and despite that being over a month away, you're being urged now to try and snag some eclipse-approved eyewear. It's important to make sure you look for sunglasses that have the label ISO 12312 or UV 400. If not, you could risk temporary or permanent eye damage, and if you're buying from an online marketplace, you could still be swindled.
Oftentimes, the retailer themselves don't inspect the third-party inventory offered by online marketplace sellers. To make the matter even worse, some online retailers actually commingle their own inventory with the third-party procured, potentially counterfeit inventory.
If you want to be certain your glasses are safe, you can check the American Astronomical Society's website for a list of reputable brands. And that'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.